Welcome back to Untold Revenge Files. Today, the story you're about to hear takes place in Haverstone, Connecticut. My name is Alyssa. I'm 28 years old, and I'm the founder of my own architectural firm. But 15 years ago, I was a 13-year-old girl standing barefoot on a frozen kitchen floor, staring at a 20-pound turkey that was hard as a cinder block, wondering if my parents had ever loved me at all. I need to take you back to understand how I got here, because the woman I am today was built on the ruins of a childhood that ended 3 days before Christmas. My parents, Derek and Fiona Calloway, had the kind of marriage that looked beautiful in photographs. Dad was a mid-level financial consultant who spent more on his suits than on groceries. Mom was a part-time interior decorator who treated her Instagram feed like a full-time career. Together, they had 3 daughters. My twin sisters, Margot and Eloise, came first. Then me, 18 months later. The afterthought, the accident, as my mother once let slip after her 3rd glass of wine at Thanksgiving. She laughed when she said it. Nobody corrected her. Margot and Eloise were everything I wasn't. They were blonde like Mom. They had her narrow nose and her easy, performative laugh. They did ballet. They wore matching outfits until they were 12. They were the kind of daughters my mother could parade around at school functions and country club brunches. I was darker-haired, quieter, smaller. I read books in corners. I built things with my hands. I once took apart the kitchen faucet at age 9 just to understand how the water knew where to go. Dad called me strange. Mom called me difficult. My sisters called me nothing at all, which was somehow worse. By 13, I had become invisible in my own home. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. In a practical way. I did my own laundry because no one remembered to include mine. I packed my own lunches because the grocery list never accounted for what I liked. I walked home from school because pickup was always timed for Margot and Eloise's ballet schedule, and by the time anyone could circle back for me, it was easier for everyone if I just handled it myself. I handled everything myself. That was my role. I was the self-sufficient one, which is what parents call the child they've decided not to parent. 3 days before Christmas, I came home from school to an empty house. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the stillness. No TV, no music, no sound of Mom on the phone. Just silence and a cold that had already crept into the walls. On the kitchen counter, there was a frozen turkey. Beside it, a handwritten note in my mother's looping cursive. Alyssa, turkey is for Christmas dinner. Instructions are on the bag. We'll be back on the 27th. Be good. Be good. I stood there reading it 3 times, waiting for it to make sense. Then I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. I wasn't usually included in family group chats, but Margot had accidentally added me to this one months ago and never bothered to remove me, probably because she forgot I existed. The most recent photo was time-stamped 2 hours earlier. It showed my parents and my sisters in first-class airline seats, champagne flutes raised, matching Santa hats tilted at identical angles. Eloise had captioned it, "Aspen, baby, Christmas done right." Before I tell you exactly what happened next, tell me, what time is it where you are right now and where are you watching from? I'm really curious to see how far this story will travel. I stared at that photo for a long time, long enough for the screen to go dark, long enough for the kitchen to go dark too, because right then the power went out. I stood in total blackness. December in Haverstone is not forgiving. The temperature outside was 19 degrees and dropping. Inside, without heat, it wouldn't be much better within hours. I found a flashlight in the junk drawer and checked the breaker box. Nothing tripped. I checked the electrical panel. That's when I saw the disconnection notice taped to the inside of the utility closet. Final notice. 60 days past due. Service terminated. They hadn't paid the electric bill. They'd bought first-class tickets to Aspen and left their 13-year-old daughter in a house with no power, no heat, and a frozen turkey. I sat on the kitchen floor in the dark. The linoleum was so cold it burned through my jeans. I pulled my knees to my chest and tried to breathe, but my lungs felt like they were wrapped in wire. I wasn't crying. I was past crying. I was in that place beyond tears where your body just goes still, like it's conserving energy for survival, like it knows something your mind hasn't accepted yet. Then headlights swept across the kitchen window. A black SUV pulled into the driveway. The engine idled for a moment, low and steady, like a heartbeat. A door opened. Footsteps on frozen gravel. The front door opened without a knock. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the SUV's headlights. Tall. Gray at the temples. A long wool coat that probably cost more than my father's car. He looked at me on the floor, looked at the dark house, and then looked at the disconnection notice still in my hand. 60 days past due, he said. Not a question, a confirmation. Uncle Robert? I whispered. I had met Robert Calloway exactly twice in my life. He was my father's older brother, and my father hated him with a bitterness that felt almost religious. Dad called him cold. Mom called him dangerous. My sisters had never met him at all. He was the family ghost, the billionaire black sheep who had built a construction and development empire while my father was still refinancing the mortgage. Robert looked around the kitchen. His gaze was clinical, like he was inspecting a failing building. "Pack a bag," he said. "One bag, 10 minutes. "Where am I going?" "Somewhere with electricity." I packed in 7 minutes. One bag. Clothes, my sketchbook, a flashlight, and the copy of Structures or Why Things Don't Fall Down that I'd checked out from the school library for the 3rd time. I left the turkey on the counter. I climbed into the back seat of the SUV. The heat was on. The leather was warm. The driver pulled out of the driveway without a word. I watched my childhood home shrink in the rear window. Dark, cold, empty. I had no idea that the man sitting silently in the front seat was about to rebuild me from the ground up, or that 15 years later I would learn the real reason my parents left me behind, and it would change everything. Uncle Robert's home was not warm. I don't mean the temperature. The temperature was fine, 72 degrees throughout, climate-controlled down to the decimal. I mean the feeling. The house was a concrete and glass fortress built into the cliffs overlooking the Long Island Sound. Every surface was hard. Every angle was deliberate. There were no throw pillows, no family photographs, no soft edges anywhere. It was the opposite of my parents' house, which had been full of soft, decorative lies. Quilted pillows that said family and blessed, while the daughter sleeping upstairs went unnoticed. For the first 2 weeks, I tried to be invisible. It was the only survival skill I had. I made my bed with military precision. I washed my dishes immediately. I stayed in my room. I moved through the house like a ghost, pressing myself against walls, taking up as little space as possible because in my experience, the less space you took, the less likely someone was to decide you were a problem. Robert noticed. Of course he noticed. Robert noticed everything. On day 15, he found me sitting in the corner of the library, reading with my knees pulled to my chest, making myself as small as possible. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, then said, "Why do you sit like that?" "Like what?" "Like you're trying to disappear." I didn't have an answer. Or rather, I had one, but it was too heavy to say out loud, because disappearing was the safest thing I knew how to do. Robert sat down across from me. Not close. He wasn't a close person. He sat at a calculated distance, the kind of distance that said, "I'm here, but I'm not crowding you." And I realize now that even that was deliberate. Everything Robert did was deliberate. "Your silence," he said, "isn't weakness. It's data collection. You've been watching rooms your whole life, figuring out where the threats are, where the exits are, who holds the power. That's not a flaw, Alyssa. That's a skill. Nobody had ever framed my quietness as anything but a deficit. My mother said I was antisocial. My father said I was awkward. My sisters said nothing, which was its own verdict. But Robert looked at me like he was reading a blueprint and he could already see the finished building. "You don't need pity," he said. "You need purpose." That night, he left 3 books outside my door. Structures or Why Things Don't Fall Down, which I already loved. Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In, and a thick legal reference guide on contract law. There was a note on top, "Read all 3. We'll discuss them on Saturday." Saturday became our ritual. Every week, Robert gave me something new. Books on engineering, design theory, negotiation strategy, behavioral psychology. He took me to construction sites where I watched steel skeletons rise from mud. He brought me to boardrooms where I sat silently in a corner, watching grown men argue over millions while Robert calmly dissected their positions and later explained to me exactly where each of them lost their leverage. Buildings aren't just buildings, he told me once, standing on the 20th floor of a half-finished tower in Bridgeport, the wind pressing against us like a living thing. They're arguments. Every beam is a decision. Every wall is a boundary. Architecture is the practice of making the invisible visible. You decide what gets in. You decide what stays out. I understood that more than he probably intended. Months passed. I enrolled in a new school. I didn't make many friends, but I didn't need to. Robert wasn't affectionate. He never hugged me. He never said, "I love you." But he showed up. Every single day, he showed up. He checked my homework. He asked about my classes. He remembered things I said weeks later and referenced them in conversation, which meant he was listening, which meant I was real to someone. One evening, 8 months after I arrived, I asked him for a desk. My room had a bed, a dresser, and a chair, but no workspace. I expected him to say yes or no. Instead, he said, "Don't ask me for a desk. Design a room. I'll give you a budget. Make it yours. But don't just make it comfortable. Make it a command center, a place where you feel untouchable." Have you ever been given a challenge that terrified you and excited you in equal measure? That was this moment for me. I spent 3 weeks on it. I sketched floor plans. I researched lighting for focus, acoustics for calm, materials for durability. I spec'd a custom desk with built-in cable management and a drafting surface that tilted. I chose concrete gray walls with a single accent wall in deep navy blue. I installed a corkboard the size of a door for pinning blueprints and ideas. I called it the vault. When it was finished, Robert stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long time. Then he nodded. "Good," he said. One word. But from Robert, it was a standing ovation. I graduated high school 2 years early. I enrolled in architecture school at 17. I worked harder than anyone in my class because I understood something my classmates didn't. I wasn't building a career, I was building proof. Proof that the girl left alone in a dark house was not what they discarded. She was what they missed. I never heard from my parents. Not once. Not a call, not a text, not even a forwarded piece of mail. It was as if the moment I left that house, I ceased to exist for them. And for a long time, that silence was the loudest sound in my life. Then, during my final year of graduate school, Robert called me into his study. He was slower now. His heart had been failing quietly for years, the way strong things fail without warning until it's almost too late. "They'll come back," he said. He didn't say who. He didn't need to. "When I'm gone, they'll come for the money. Don't let them rewrite the story." He handed me a sealed envelope, thick and cream-colored, his attorney's embossed letterhead in the corner. "Don't open this until the will reading. Promise me." I promised. I didn't understand yet, but I promised. 6 months later, Robert collapsed in his office. He died before the ambulance reached the hospital, and I was alone again, except this time, I knew what alone was worth. Grief is a strange architect. It doesn't build walls, it removes them. After Robert died, I felt exposed in a way I hadn't since I was 13. The fortress he'd built around me, around us, was suddenly just a house, concrete and glass and silence. But grief also clarifies. In the weeks after his death, I did what Robert taught me. I studied the room. I identified the load-bearing walls of my life and reinforced them. I threw myself into my work. I had already been building a reputation in the firm where I'd interned throughout graduate school. Now, I worked with the kind of focus that borders on obsession. I designed a community center in New Haven that won a regional award. I redesigned a failing hospital wing in Hartford, improving patient flow by 30%. I published a paper on adaptive reuse architecture that got picked up by 3 industry journals. Within 2 years of Robert's death, I opened my own firm, Callaway Design Group. I kept his name because it was mine too, and because he earned it in ways my father never did. I hired 12 people. We worked out of a converted warehouse in downtown Haverstone. All exposed steel and open sight lines because I wanted a space that hid nothing. I built a life, a real one. My colleague, Dara Mitchell, became my closest friend. She was an engineer with a laugh like a thunderclap who had no patience for self-pity, but infinite patience for growth. My mentor from graduate school, Professor Alderman, stayed in my orbit, sending me articles and project leads. I dated carefully. I traveled. I learned to cook things that weren't survival meals. I learned to fill silence with something other than vigilance. I was 27 when the letter arrived. It came from Robert's attorney, a man named Fenton, and it contained 2 sentences. The probate process is complete. The will reading is scheduled for March 14th at 10 SWAD a.m. And then the phone calls started. My father called first. I hadn't heard his voice in 14 years. It sounded older but carried the same performative warmth, the voice he used with clients and strangers. "Alyssa, sweetheart, we heard about Robert. We're just devastated. We'd love to be at the reading. Family should be together at times like this." Family. The word landed like a stone in still water. My mother called next. She didn't even pretend grief. "Alyssa, I know we haven't been in touch, but Robert was Derek's brother, and we have a right to be there. We have a right to know what's in that will." Then Margot texted. It was the first text she'd ever sent me. It said, "Hey, so sorry about Uncle Robert. Are you okay? Also, do you know if the will reading is open to family members? Mom said we should all be there." I read that text 6 times. Also. The word also. As if my well-being and their inheritance claim were items on the same grocery list. Bread, milk, also. Do you know about the money? Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever had someone disappear from your life completely, then show up the moment there's something to gain? How did it make you feel? Because I can tell you how it made me feel. It made me feel like that frozen turkey on the counter. Something they'd left behind until they were ready to use it. I told Fenton to allow them to attend, not because I wanted them there, because Robert had told me to let them come, because the blueprint required their presence. March 14th, Fenton's office. Mahogany conference table. 6 leather chairs. They arrived together. All 4 of them. My father in a black suit that was slightly too tight, the way suits fit men who've stopped taking care of themselves but haven't noticed. My mother in head-to-toe designer black, dabbing at dry eyes with a pressed handkerchief. Margot and Eloise flanking them like matching bookends, now 29, still blonde, still performing. My mother hugged me at the door. I let her. Her perfume was the same. Dior. It hit me like a flashback, like being 9 years old and watching her spray it on before leaving for a party I wasn't invited to. "You look wonderful," she said, holding me at arm's length, studying me the way you study a stock ticker. "Robert clearly took good care of you." "I took good care of me," I said. Fenton began. He was methodical, unhurried. He read through the preliminary bequests, charitable donations, a scholarship fund, property transfers to long-standing employees. Then he reached the primary estate. The remainder of the estate, including all real property, financial holdings, business interests, and personal assets, valued collectively at approximately $420 million, is bequeathed in its entirety to Alyssa Renee Calloway. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted. My father broke it. That can't be right. I'm his brother. His only living brother." Fenton didn't flinch. "Mr. Calloway's instructions were explicit and have been validated through multiple legal reviews." My mother's handkerchief was crumpled in her fist. "This is outrageous. We're his family. She lived with him for a few years. We have grounds to contest this." "Before you consider that," Fenton said, and his voice shifted, became something harder, something Robert would have recognized. "There is an additional document Mr. Calloway asked me to present." He opened a file and placed a single document on the table. It was dated 15 years earlier. December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas, the day they left. It was a loan agreement, $500,000, transferred from Robert Calloway to Derek and Fiona Calloway. The terms were explicit. In exchange for the loan, Derek and Fiona agreed to relinquish all parental rights and custodial claim to their minor daughter, Alyssa Renee Calloway, effective immediately. My parents' signatures were at the bottom, both of them, notarized. I wasn't abandoned. I was sold for $500,000. My parents looked at their 3 daughters, did the math, and decided I was the one they could afford to trade. I've replayed the next 60 seconds in my mind more times than I can count, not because I'm stuck there, because I want to remember exactly what it felt like to finally understand the full architecture of my own life. My father's face went white. Not embarrassed white, caught white, the color of a man watching a load-bearing wall crack in real time, knowing the whole structure is about to come down. My mother started talking immediately. That was her instinct, to fill dangerous silence with words, to narrate reality into something softer before anyone could see the truth. "This is being taken out of context," she said. "Robert pressured us. We were in financial trouble. He offered to help, and those terms were his idea. We never intended—" You never intended what?" I said. My voice was steady. "I'm still proud of that. To leave me in a house with no power in December? To fly to Aspen while your 13-year-old daughter sat on a freezing kitchen floor? Or to never call? Not once in 15 years. Not a birthday. Not a holiday. Nothing. We thought you were better off with him," my father said quietly. "No. You thought $500,000 was better than me. That's not the same thing." Margot was crying. Real tears, I think, though with Margot it was always hard to tell. "Alyssa, we didn't know. Eloise and I didn't know about any of this." I looked at my sisters, and I believed them. They were 17 when it happened, wrapped up in their own world of ballet recitals and college prep. They probably didn't ask where I went. They probably didn't notice I was gone. And I'm not sure which is worse, being sold by your parents or being so invisible to your sisters that your disappearance didn't even register. "You didn't know about the document," I said, "but you knew I was gone. And you never once reached out." Eloise opened her mouth, then closed it. She had nothing. There was nothing to say. Fenton cleared his throat. "Ms. Calloway, would you like me to proceed?" "Yes." "As the sole beneficiary and now legal owner of this property and all associated holdings, you have full authority over who is permitted on the premises. Would you like security to escort your guests out?" I looked at my family. My father, smaller than I remembered. My mother, still clutching her handkerchief like a prop in a play that was closing early. My sisters, blinking in the fluorescent light like animals pulled from a burrow. "Please," I said. Security arrived within a minute. 2 men in dark suits, calm and professional. My parents stood slowly. My mother tried one last time. "Alyssa, please. We're your parents. Whatever happened, we can work through this. We're still family." "You were my family," I said. "And you sold that. For $500,000. You signed it away and never looked back. I'm not punishing you. I'm just closing the door you walked out of 15 years ago." They left. My mother's heels clicked down the marble hallway. My father didn't look back. Margot paused at the door like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. Eloise followed her, head down. When the door closed, I sat in that conference room for a long time. Fenton left me alone. I think he understood. I opened the sealed envelope Robert had given me. Inside was a single piece of paper. His handwriting, neat and angular. It said, "Alyssa, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and they came for the money. They always come for the money. I want you to know something I never said well enough while I was alive. I didn't take you in out of obligation. I took you in because when I walked into that dark house and saw a 13-year-old girl sitting on a cold floor, not crying, not panicking, just surviving, I recognized myself. You were never the child they threw away. You were the one they couldn't break. Don't let them back in. Not because they don't deserve forgiveness, because you don't deserve to be the thing they reach for only when they need something. Build your life. Build it strong. Build it for you. R. I cried then. For the first time in years, I cried. Not for what I lost, for what I was given. 5 years with a man who saw me, who taught me that silence was strategy, that observation was power, that buildings and people are the same. You can't build anything lasting on a cracked foundation. That was 11 months ago. My firm is thriving. We broke ground on a mixed-use development in Stamford last month. Dara and I hired 6 new associates. I'm designing a children's community space in New Haven, a building specifically for kids who need somewhere safe to go after school. I'm calling it The Vault. My parents have not contacted me since the reading. Margot sent one email 3 months later. It was short. It said, "I'm sorry I never asked where you went." I read it. I didn't respond. Maybe one day I will. Maybe I won't. I haven't decided, and for the first time in my life, I'm comfortable with not having the answer. I don't hate my parents. Hate requires energy I'd rather spend building things. But I don't owe them access to my life just because they share my blood. They made their choice 15 years ago, signed it, notarized it, and flew to Aspen. I've made mine. So, after everything you've heard, if you were standing where I am now, with the parents who sold you for $500,000 knocking at your door asking for reconciliation, would you open it and call it forgiveness? Or would you build something stronger and call it self-respect? Robert once told me that every building tells a story. The materials, the angles, the way light enters a room, it all says something about who built it and why. I think people are the same. I was built by abandonment. I was rebuilt by a man who understood that the strongest structures aren't the ones that never crack. They're the ones designed to hold weight. I'm holding my own weight now, and the door is exactly where I want it. Closed, locked, mine. And that's where Alyssa's story ends. Not with revenge, not with anger, but with a locked door and a life she built with her own 2 hands. You know, sometimes the greatest revenge isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It isn't some big confrontation where you scream and yell and make someone feel small. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply becoming the person they never believed you could be, and then quietly, peacefully, permanently, closing the door. Alyssa didn't destroy her parents. She didn't need to. They destroyed themselves the moment they signed that document, the moment they chose $500,000 over their own daughter. And 15 years later, when they came back looking for millions, all they found was a door that no longer opened for them. Let me ask you one last thing before you go. If you were sold by the people who were supposed to protect you, would you let them buy their way back in? Think about that. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story. And drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done at that will reading? I read every single comment, every one. Until next time, remember this. You are not what they left behind. You are what they lost. I'll see you in the next one.